Hello, and welcome to the Root to Rise Seeds for Spiritual Awakening podcast. Today, as our guest, we have Joanna Roux. Joanna is a QHHT practitioner with a deep background in fields such as nursing, counseling psychology, teaching and facilitation, and various energy, healing, and intuitive practices. As a QHHT practitioner, Joanna provides people with a sense of safety and comfort so that they can access their higher selves and become their own healers. Welcome, Joanna.
Thanks, Meg.
So happy to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here.
Great. So, to get started, can you introduce us to what QHHT is and explain how it works?
Sure. So QHHT was developed by Dolores Cannon beginning in the 1960s when no one else knew about, when people were doing hypnosis for things like smoking cessation and weight loss. And she was working with her husband, and suddenly a past life came through in one of their sessions. He didn't want anything to do with it, and she took it and ran with it. And then she spent 40 years developing her technique down to where, back in those days, it would take over an hour for people to induce someone into a hypnotic state. And she developed a form that induces somebody in a few minutes. So it very much evolved as she went through it. And now it's used very much for issues in people's lives. It's used for physical, mental, emotional, spiritual kinds of things. And it's a form of hypnosis that works with the natural states of consciousness that we move into and out of throughout the day. So it's meant for personal development so that you can work with those blockages. And the practitioner in a QHHT session is a facilitator, is guiding the process to help the person feel safe and comfortable, to work to understand the questions that they bring to the sessions, and helping the person to connect with the higher part of themselves. And that's referred to either as the higher self, the soul, the subconscious, whatever the person wants to call it, but the part of you that has the bigger picture, knows everything that's ever gone on in your life and lives, and can answer some of the questions that you bring about the roots of what's happening in your life, how to adjust that sort of thing. So it's a pretty deep kind of thing, and can get deeper and deeper.
Definitely, yeah. And, I had just heard about QHHT probably 2 months ago, which is how I met you, and we had that,
Yep.
serendipitous meeting. So, what first inspired you to become a QHHT practitioner? How did you find it, and how has it helped you on your spiritual path?
Well, so the spiritual path has been a long and winding and kind of crazy trip. From the long picture, years and years and years ago, when no one ever talked about this kind of thing, I watched someone do a past life regression on late night TV, and I was fascinated by it. Stuck in my mind, but it didn't really take it anywhere. But in the past couple of years, I have watched someone named Alba Weinman who does hypnosis sessions on YouTube. And I, again, was absolutely caught up in that and amazed by it. And then how I got to start to study it was that I listened to a podcast called Next Level Soul. And on that was a woman, Suzanne Spooner, who's one of the top QHHT practitioners and studied with Dolores Cannon. And she talked more about it. She talked about what she did. She has a bunch of sessions on YouTube to watch that are pretty amazing. And so I looked at Alba Weinman's description under her YouTube things, and she had studied QHHT, but she doesn't practice it now, although there are parts of it that show up in it. She studied a bunch of different things and developed her own technique. Suzanne Spooner had the full-on QHHT, experience, and a way to get, to contact to get to their website and to learn about what they had to offer for classes. And so I jumped on that, and the rest is history. And it's just been amazing. So that's how it started. Spiritual evolution, like I said, that's been a long, strange trip. So that's something I've been interested in for a long time. My mother used to she'd read them, and then we'd share reading, we'd pass books back and forth when I was an early teenager. I was fascinated by all this stuff, but kind of scared of it. And then, but at the same time, I also did things like I spent my last $45 just as I was about to go to college. I was away. My parents were at that point. My family had been down in Florida for a little while. So I spent the last money that I had to learn how to do transcendental meditation. So that happened a long, long time ago. And I've also had all these other bizarre, otherworldly things happen over the course of my life. Some wonderful, some that I prompted, some that weren't prompted, like out of body experiences. I learned how to do that consciously at one point. And in the mid 90s, when this was all flourishing, like there were new age bookstores everywhere, I learned how to read tarot cards and taught classes in it and that kind of thing. And I love to learn new things, so I'm taking classes still all the time. Mediumship, channeling, different kinds of energy healing techniques, reading books. I belonged to a spiritualist church for about a year and a half, and they had a lot of classes. So, you name it, I'll try it. If I think it's going to get me somewhere spiritually going to help me, and if it kind of calls to me. So then also in the early 2000s, I lost several family members, including my daughter. So that moved things in a sort of a different kind of direction and also kind of amped them up. But it's still going on. I'm going to Peru relatively soon to do some hypnosis training and also to visit sacred sites in Machu Picchu and things like that.
Wow.
So yeah, so it keeps on it's the gift that keeps on giving.
That's amazing. And it sounds like you kind of always had this spiritual connection, these spiritual practices that you were doing. You mentioned the tarot, you mentioned the books, people that you were listening to, but you also have a background in the healthcare industry and mental health counseling as well. So, how would you say that has played into your understanding of QHHT and maybe your understanding of the mind body spirit connection?
Well, right now, being where I am with the QHHT, that and again, the healthcare piece is only part of my work history. And I stopped being a nurse a long time ago. But all the things, the different weird things that I've followed and been interested in and learned have helped me. And I can see where they got me to where I am with QHHT. So, for example, having been a nurse, I'm very comfortable with, one-to-one situations and people that are in distress or ill health. And I know anatomy and physiology really well. So that's, if you have that vocabulary, then spirit can work with you. Your higher self and the client's higher self can work with you so that you understand, they know you understand the terms and you can use the right terms and you can, that helps. Also, I did at a different point, I did counseling psychology as well. I studied at a graduate level. And at one point I did bereavement counseling with a visiting nurse association. And, so I have no problem talking to people about anything, talking with them and listening about anything that happened. So it's kind of like if you can be there when they're grieving or about to grieve as their loved one is dying, you can pretty much talk about anything. So that doesn't, I, I feel for people that are going through those kinds of, and I've been through things myself in my life. So I feel for people that are going through those kinds of things. So I have an appreciation of what can help, what might help, what might harm, that sort of thing. So as far as the healthcare system, I became disenchanted with that a long time ago, the traditional medical system. And then I left that as a nurse, but then I came back quite a few years later and worked as a trainer and a consultant in a hospital system and saw behind the scenes what was going on at the top levels and all that stuff. And I became even more disenchanted. And then, especially when my family members were ill, several went through, chemo and surgeries and radiation and all those kinds of things. And I'm the nurse in the family, so I was around to watch that happen. It was even worse. That was one piece of it. And I think that helped prod me to get into some other kinds of things. So back even in the 90s, again, where New Age things were all on every corner, I took a bunch of different classes. One was Barbara Brennan's energy healing stuff was popular at the time. I went to New Mexico and learned about that. I learned something called polarity therapy. That was a year-long program that was kind of like Reiki or a little bit like Reiki, but it was light touch involved, and that was really interesting. I went to a wellness expo and I was just trying different stuff. Must have had some loose money to spend and I just wanted to try different things. And in the middle of an exposition center in Boston, I have a hard time sleeping in my own quiet house. I went out cold during this session that as they were doing the healings demo on me in this trade center with thousands of people milling around. If I could do that, I thought there's something to this thing, and that's why I studied it. So, that was part of it. I also read this book way back when called Vibrational Healing, and it was written by an MD who talked about some of the different things like acupuncture and all those things that had been around for a long time, but used medical tools to test and see what was happening. Like they put on acupuncture needles, they put things that measured the current that was coming from the acupuncture points and stuff like that. So it was very convincing to me, that book. But then other things, different kinds of healing, not just physical healing, the mediumship and channeling kinds of things that I'd studied. I've seen amazing healing experiences for me, about my family members, and also for the people that when I was the medium or I was the sitter. I was the medium. I've seen what's happened to other people that I read for. I mean, an example of that was my brother and I didn't get along very well when he was alive. And at this one point, in a class, in a little exercise we were doing, this woman who didn't even seem like she particularly wanted to be there picked up on him and said some things that were just the way he would say it. And also, she said, at one point said, "Come on, Joe. Nobody outside of my family or the people I grew up with calls me Joe, ever." And this woman didn't know me from a hole in the wall. So it sounded like him. It hit on things that were part of our experience, and it was very healing. So that kind of stuff. Get it? And then I used to go to acupuncture, and saw that. That was the only thing that helped me when I worked in a really toxic environment, was stressed out all the time. So when my daughter was going through cancer treatment and had chemo and radiation and surgeries and all that kind of stuff, one of the things she said to me, she and I would go to acupuncture together, and she said the acupuncturist was the only person in that whole realm of people that were caring for her, quote unquote, that made her feel cared for, the acupuncturist. So, and we are spirit and everything is energy, and our body is electromagnetic. That's why MRIs and CAT scans and those kinds of things work. So once I thought about that, and also the things that have been around for years, that our minds, our behaviors, our thought patterns, they all influence whether energy gets blocked or flows freely, and the repetitive behaviors that cause the blockages eventually create disease. That thought's been around for a long, long time, and been pretty well, accepted kind of into the day-to-day existence of people these days. People don't think it's an oddball idea anymore as much. So I've seen what can happen with that. And then, of course, then having my own QHHT sessions from other practitioners, and then offering what I see as a facilitator is just phenomenal and astounding every single time.
That's awesome. It sounds like you, along with your scientific background and knowledge, you've also had sort of reaffirming things happen to you, like you mentioned, the medium speaking to you as your brother. I think that's really important, and not everybody has that or is open to receiving sort of those experiences. So, for someone who might be unfamiliar with QHHT, maybe a little skeptical, what would you say for them to prepare for a session? What can they expect in a session? And how can they kind of open their minds to maybe letting their higher self connect with them?
Yeah, a lot of the higher self piece connecting, people are sometimes afraid because they don't know what that is or means, but it's really just you. It's not some, I don't know, ghost or something. I don't know what people think it is. It's not something that's trying to control you. It's guiding you from a kind of a higher perspective of your life, and it's got your best interests in mind. So that's one thing. But again, so people who need a lot of control, and that's usually based in fear of something. One of the ways things can happen in QHHT, so that's easier to work with, is it starts in the very beginning. It starts even before a session. So a lot of times I like to talk to people who want to have a session ahead of time, so they can ask any questions they want, so they can have a chance to hear what I have to say about it. They can get to know me a little bit, or at least like kind of feel a vibe from me to see whether they really want to do it or not. And I try to help them understand the things that they might be afraid of, why that may, that most likely won't happen in the session. So the QHHT is really an individual session. You're in a deeper trance state. And from that state, you can, in a particular session, you go through a time where we talk about the person's life. We hear from you. What's your life story? Who are the people in it? What are the patterns you've seen? What are the repeating themes that have come up in your life? We're finding out what you want to get out of the session. What are the questions that you came with, so that I understand what they are when we get to the point where the person's in trance, and I can kind of make sure that those questions get addressed, hopefully. It's a natural state that you're in. The trance state that you go into isn't anything super weird, because we're into it twice a day at least. So in the trance state, it's the state that you're in when you first wake up in the morning and when you're falling asleep at night, that in between state where you're not quite awake and you're not quite asleep. That's all it is. And when you're in that state, when you're in hypnosis, and you can tell me what it was like for you too, as well, for your session. But for me, when I have QHHT sessions, I feel relaxed, kind of like a guided meditation. If you've ever experienced a guided meditation, to me, I thought that was very similar to what that was like. You're relaxed, but a little detached. You're aware. People used to, in the early days of QHHT, they'd go out cold. And when practitioners have asked the higher selves about that of their clients, they say it's because back in those days, no one knew what past lives were, no one knew what this kind of thing was, and they wouldn't have believed the results unless they went deeper and they listened to the recording that's made in the session, played it back, and heard this stuff coming out of their own mouths. So I think that helped people understand and feel better about it. And I've mentioned past lives a couple of times, and that's part of, it's not necessarily past lives these days. That's part of the experience that you look at. You don't have to experience pain or anything like that. You can sit and kind of report on it. You can see it and report on it. There are suggestions within being in the trance that you can say, you can just watch this like a movie, just tell me what's happening, kind of thing. And using those past lives, and again, sometimes it turns out to be memories from this life, or it turns out to be other experiences, which sometimes people go between lives. Sometimes they go off planet, shall we say. There are all kinds of unusual things, but it's most often a past life, or in my experience, or a memory from earlier in this life that has some bearing on why you're here and what's going on in your life right now. A lot of times, it seems to me, most often the childhood things are positive memories. But even difficult, I mean, you had people with very difficult situations in their lives, and still they've gone through it feeling fine about it. They're not disturbed. And there's a lot within the whole session while the person's in trance to make sure that they walk away from that, putting that experience where it belongs, and not having it bother them after they've finished with the session. So you're just working with that client. Once they get deep enough and relaxed enough, you connect then with their higher self. And to me, that's them just bringing through, or channeling, if you want to call it that, the part of them that knows better. You know how they talk about when people are under anesthesia, they don't remember they're aware of what's said, but they don't necessarily remember it. It's all of those things, everything that's ever happened to you or been said around you, or you've thought, or whatever, it all sort of can be accessed. Mm-hmm. So, and people are becoming more aware of that right now. And the recording, I think, is important too, because I think that helps people feel. I think a lot of times people are concerned that someone else is going to control them, but that's not the case at all. It's just like in my role, it's just as a facilitator to ask the right questions, to help guide through this process that gets them to that deep state, and to kind of, with the higher self, a lot of times they'll answer in very short, closed-ended way. She knows this, and then it's up to me to kind of prompt and say, okay, how would you explain this a little bit better? Or she'll know. Can you tell me a little bit about what she should be looking for? That kind of thing. Is anything else about, explaining to someone who's a little concerned that you want to know about?
No, I think that definitely makes sense. And I can kind of echo what you're saying about how it's very meditative, very much guided. When I listen back to my own recording, there's no suggestions that you're putting into my subconscious. It's just more of a guided imagery meditation, like you're saying. And in my experience, I did have a childhood memory that was almost rewritten to be positive so that I could have a positive relation to a certain time in my childhood. So that was very profound. I think, I am somebody who also struggles a little bit to let go of control, to really drop in. So that's why you suggested to do the past life regression group session before we
Mm-hmm.
did our one on one. So, would you mind talking a little bit about how the group session differs from an individual session and how that might help somebody sort of ease into their one on one session?
Sure. So the group session these are great, and it really does make a difference. A lot of the practitioners have found that I've seen on the forum that QHHT has that they say anyone who's gone to a group regression session has a much easier time in an individual session, is able to go more deeply, is able to relax more, that kind of thing. So in the group session, it's a lighter state of trance because you're not in this intensive one-on-one situation with another person. You're there with as many people as you can fit in the room, as I told you. We had the one you went to, and you go through a series of exercises. One's about visualization. Actually, there are a couple about visualization. There's one about a past life. And then there are some other variations of that you can do if there's time. It's not exactly the same as QHHT because in QHHT, among other things, you're having a constant back and forth. You're having a conversation the entire time, even while you're in trance. So to tell me what you're seeing, to tell me what's going on. In the group regression, what we do is you have the exercise, you have the experience, you're guided through that. And then when that part of the exercise is done, we take out a notebook and jot down what you went through. Before anybody starts speaking, everybody just jots down their experiences. Then we share with the group, whoever wants to share. It's not mandatory, but what happened. And I think the great thing about that is people get to see, oh, I'm not the only one that thought I was making it up.
Everybody in our group
Yep.
regression thought they were making it up.
Yep. And then you realize that that's, the part of your mind that you're using with this is the part of your mind that's imaginative. It is your imagination kind of, but that doesn't mean that it's not valid. You're pulling through things that have a reason. And I think with yours, didn't you have the same person, like you went into the same past life as you did in the group session in your individual session, but it took a different turn toward the end. It wasn't exactly what it seemed like.
That's right. Yeah, it was sort of a snippet in the group session. And then in my individual session, I was able to go more deeply into it and kind of see through the threads to see what the message was for my current self. And I had a thought, it's escaping me, but I definitely think the group session was worth it. It was helpful to kind of know what to expect and have that practice of going in and dropping into that hypnotic state. And it was fun too
Yeah,
to hear other people's, past lives and kind of see what they were experiencing as well. So it was very interesting.
that's one of the things I like about it because it is fun, and you can see that it's not scary.
Hmm.
So that's the biggest thing. Like I said, it's a lighter state of trance. I did one very small group session with my sister and her daughter, and what my sister liked about it was that we weren't talking back and forth all the time because she could really sink into the experience. So that's another thing. That's more like the guided meditation.
Yes, definitely. And I did like in the group session how we would sort of go through a prompt and then everybody had their journal to kind of write down what they had seen. And like you said, it was just very low pressure. It was a little more difficult to get into your head with that one of thinking you're making it up because you're just writing it down. You don't have to share it, like you said. And I did want to mention one thing you said about how people think that they're making it up because it's imagination and that's the part of the mind you're using. But there's also a school of thought that believes that our connection to our higher self, to spirit, to source, whatever you want to call it, is our creativity. And when we're in that creative flow is when we're actually connected with our
Right.
source. So,
Right. That's when you can be more open. That's the
mhm,
thing. It's kind of has elements of the same energy,
mhm.
basically. We're all energy. It's all energy. And yet that's when you're able to open up to that. And I think that's where sometimes people get concerned, and that's what kind of gets in the way a little bit of them being able to open up. That's why a lot of what goes on in a session is built into the session. The time we spend talking ahead of time, the way I would use my voice, the environment that, like the little room that I have that we do it in, that kind of thing, to try to help make sure people feel safe and relaxed. And the other thing that strikes me, because this is what happened when I have had acupuncture early on. I think there's this thing about doing something for the first time where you're hyper alert. Not, and I, like the first time I had acupuncture, I really wanted it. I wasn't scared at all. I really wanted to do it. But what I could find my mind, I'm someone who has a hard time shutting my mind off too. And it was in my house on my massage table with someone I know and love. I found myself going, what's going to happen next? Like I'm doing that the whole time. And then the second time this person did a session for me, I went out before he finished putting the needles in, because I knew what it was like. So that's what I feel the benefit too of a group session is that you get a chance to taste the pieces of it. And there are a lot of pieces in that group session that are mimicked or used outright in a QHHT session. But the difference is that one is a deep state where you're interacting back and forth with the facilitator and the client, and that it's one-on-one. And also there's the whole higher self part that you go into much more depth with. So the group sessions are also shorter, even though I think we went on for about 3 hours maybe, but it seemed like it went by fast.
It didn't feel long, but I think it ended up being 3 hours. So like you said, it's fun to do it with your friends. It's a good experience. And it did set me up, and my other friend who did a session with you, it set her up as well to kind of drop in more deeply. So on the topic of the QHHT individual sessions, you mentioned before that people come with questions and they're kind of looking for certain things. Would you say there's a common theme of reasons people seek out QHHT? What kind of things are they usually hoping to address? And have you witnessed any profound transformations from the questions that people bring?
So yeah, those are long questions.
Yes,
multiple complex questions. So the reasons people seek out QHHT are all the human things. At first, physical issues, diseases, chronic pain, things like that they've been working with, results, after effects of, botched surgeries or wear and tear from age or all kinds of things like that. Long-standing emotional situations like grief or shame or guilt or depression, and patterns they'd like to break. Why do I always do this? Why can't I stop judging people? That kind of thing. Relationship questions. How can I help support my child the best way possible? Or why do I always feel like, this person and I hit it off right away when we knew each other? We felt like we'd known each other forever. That sort of past life kind of prompt. And spiritual development. So what's my purpose in life? How can I connect more solidly with my higher self? Those kinds of things. Broad spectrum, but everybody is different. Every session is different. And there's a process underlying it, underlying what I'm doing. There are certain steps, ways to make this happen. But I don't think I've ever had any session that went exactly the way it was quote unquote supposed to, because things come up. Things take different turns. People come into a different place in their past life than was expected. They come in between lives or something like that, and you work with that. But, you individualize it. Everyone's unique. You individualize it, help them feel safe and comfortable, like I mentioned. You listen carefully to what they have to tell you about themselves and what they're trying to achieve. It really helps to be very curious about what's happening to them as the session goes along, asking a lot of open-ended questions to have them offer more. Give you essay type answers instead of yes or no. And also having to kind of be fast on your feet with figuring out where to take things when something happens that you didn't expect, which is several times in every session. So, it's being able to just kind of go with what's happening in the session.
Awesome.
Does that feel like it answers your question?
Definitely. Yeah, it does.
Oh, you mentioned the transformation or the amazing things that happen.
Yeah, either for you or clients you've worked with. What have you seen, and what kind of stands out to you?
Yeah, well, there there's several different instances of people having physical pain that they've had for years. And when they sit up from the session, they say it's gone and it stays gone. One person, I think I did a session for in March, sat up and said, "Oh, I've had this lower back pain." And it was on her list, but somehow we didn't really talk about it. And she said, "That's weird. I've had lower back pain for a long time, and now it's gone." And I've checked in with her frequently since. This was 9 months ago.
Wow.
And part of what people can help with that is sometimes if you've had experienced something like that for a long time, you think, and this client had a way of approaching it that I thought was really good. She said, when she first set up, she said, "I still kind of feel the echo of it as if it's going to happen." And then we talked about that, and I kept checking in on her. And she said, "I finally have told myself, oh, I used to have that, but I don't have it anymore." And so anytime that she felt that, what she called an echo, that's what she said to herself to help it continue to go on that way. I've also been kind of astounded when there are issues that come up on the body scan that the client didn't bring up, but they might have known existed, and they go, "Oh yeah, I've had that for, this long time," and it gets fixed. Or when they can feel what's happening. They can feel what's being done, like someone that had an issue with one of her legs, and the higher self said it's out of alignment, and they aligned it during the session, and she said, "I can feel them doing that." And then told me, I don't know, a couple of weeks later, "It's great. My leg is fine."
Wow.
And it had been an issue for a long time, so, and then some of the kind of jaw-dropping ones have to do with the kind of what I think of as ecstatic experiences that people have either in the between life state, because we didn't talk about that, but every past life that you work with, and that's not saying it the right way, but when you go into the past life part, you take the person through, as you know, through the last day of their life and to the other side after the life. And that's where a lot of the amazing stuff happens, because I've had people who, when they get on the other side, they said, "Oh, it's so," I always say, what is, the guides that have been with you your life, what do they say to you? And they always say, "Welcome back," and so they'd say, "It feels so welcoming. It's just love. And it's so forgiving, and it's not about punishment. And you're just having these experiences in life to learn from." And one person said, "I'm not afraid of death anymore," because of that one little sort of like maybe 5-minute piece of the session, among other things, but that was huge, I think. And then I've had a client who embodied what was in this past life scenario, and it was hard for me to tell whether the way it came across was as if the person in that past life died and was in spirit now, but they weren't. An angel came along and let this person embody the angel's body and feel what it felt like to be an angel. And that was just astounding, you know, having that to hark back to. If you're feeling down or things aren't going your way or something, you get to feel that.
That's so true. And there's definitely a lot of spiritual teachings about how being able to connect with a feeling of your manifestation or something that you want in your life is so important. And if you haven't had that feeling, you won't be able to connect with it. So you mentioned the woman who could feel her leg aligning, having that feeling of alignment to reference back to, or having that feeling of coming home to your soul at the end of a life and being welcomed and loved. Like you said, just being able to reference that in your daily life can help you sort of walk through life in a more peaceful, joyful way. And I really liked what you shared as well about the woman who had the back pain and how she mentioned it was an echo. And then she just decided to tell herself, "I used to have that, but I don't anymore."
Right.
And it's sort of like we get so used to being in a certain state. And then when we're not in that state anymore, we almost don't know what to do. But I think
Right.
the mindset shift that she had was super profound and important for sustaining that healing, like you said.
Yeah. And another one, this last example was pretty striking to me. And person has had asthma for 30 years. over 30 years and has been on inhalers, steroid inhalers, and that kind of thing. And when the higher self did a body scan, they said it was sensing that this, I'm always asking what's the origin of that, and they were sensing this was from a drowning. And as we followed that back, we very often follow it back to where that first began. When was the first time this person experienced this? And she could see herself and feel herself underwater, although again, it didn't disturb her. She could watch it as a movie basically, but she could give me the details. And she had her hands bound behind her, and she was underwater. Someone had drowned her. And so then her higher self healed that back in that life. She saw it as like a capsule of darkness, is the way she was telling me about it. Her higher self was telling me about it, and sent it light. And it changed from dark to light, and it came all the way up this kind of thread, they usually call it, back to her body. And it came up her side and up across her lungs. And she said, I felt like that's the first time I've taken a deep breath, full, kind of clean breath in ages. And, and then the higher self had advice about the inhalers and about natural things that could be done to help not need to rely on them as much. I believe it was in September, so that's 3 months ago. I think she's only used her inhalers maybe two or three times because of something provoked, like she was at an outdoor barbecue or something, and the smoke got to her, so that she needed it a couple of days after that. But in those 3 months, she's hardly used those at all, and she's been using these other natural teas and inhaled steam and things like that. And she has something that she can check a pulse oximeter. She can check her oxygen every morning, and it's been better than it was when even she was on the medication.
That's so amazing. I mean, and you had mentioned before that this higher self, it's not outside of us, it's not this entity. You're not suggesting anything to people who are going through QHHT. It's all within them. The healing that they're accessing, that they're providing for themselves, it's all within.
That's what I like most about it. Because, like I read tarot cards at one point, or I've done other kinds of energy healing, and it's like people are coming to you for this, and they think that somehow you've got the power to heal them, but it's not, it's them. Even with some of the energy healing things, I still wasn't doing it, but you're putting your hands on them and stuff, so they think you're creating this. But with this, it's not only very clear that they're doing this themselves, that it's coming from their higher self, but they can hear it on the recording. It's in their voice, and that has its own frequency that can help with the healing. So that's
Exactly.
very cool.
And it's continuous. My higher self recommended for me to listen to my recording once a week, and maybe someone else has wanted them to listen to it more or less, but every time you listen back to it, you hear something different, and it can unlock something inside to kind of continue to facilitate that healing. So very,
Yeah.
very interesting. And I want to ask you about your own experience with QHHT as a participant, as somebody who's
As a client. Yeah.
Yes, as a client, yes. So can you tell me a little bit about how your experience with QHHT has maybe strengthened your connection with your higher self and kind of helped you along your journey as well?
Mm-hmm. In recent years, because of a lot of the things that I've done, I feel like I have a pretty strong connection with my higher self, but it's not like it's sitting there going, hey, do this, do that. Like once in a while I can tell when it's not, or often enough I can tell when it's not me. And I have a lot of ways to kind of get around that. But what I came away from with the two experiences, because practitioners share sessions with one another. That's the other thing we didn't say, is that a QHHT session ordinarily is meant to be one and done, unless something happens, like as if something in your life happens that's significant, that you might need to revisit it, something. Basically, it's meant to get at whatever needs to be taken care of at that time. So with the two sessions that I've had, One of them, I wasn't sure. I had done plenty of sessions with other people, and I thought, am I really going to be able to go under? Because I know the script, I know how it's supposed to go, all of that. One of the things that happens is as long as you keep talking in the session, it starts to reveal more information. And the thing that I mainly walked away from that one with is that this absolutely was something that I need to believe. Not that I wouldn't, but because there's no way I could have made it up. I'm not a good storyteller or story maker-upper. I couldn't even do that in school when you were asked to do it. But it was something that took place in ancient Egypt, and it was kind of outside the realm of what I ordinarily think about or am interested in or that kind of thing. So it was pretty astonishing. I let my sister listen to the recording, and she said, every once in a while you just keep going, huh, that's weird. So I was it was all unfolding in front of me as I went along, but I was definitely aware through the whole thing, but removed. So I knew there were times, I'm trying to think, in one of the sessions, there were times when I knew that I had this big smile on my face. So I knew my face was smiling. That's about the way I was feeling. Not like I was smiling. I knew my face was smiling. So I was a little bit removed from that. And that was kind of one of those interesting ecstatic experiences. So the one in ancient Egypt was, again, very much developed in a way that I never would have foreseen, never would have been able to make up. So that was a great indicator for me. Does this really do something? So then the other life that I visited, that I took part in, I was someone who lived in a very primitive African jungle village. And it became clear toward the end of it that the people in my community, we'd get together once a year and we would use plant medicine to talk with the spirits on the other side. And the men did one thing, took one kind of thing, the women took other kind of thing because they had different responsibilities within the community. And I was a male. And what you did is every year we'd go to this and we'd basically visit the other world, what I ended up saying out of my mouth that the practitioner repeated back, and I didn't think about it when I was saying it, was I kept calling it the true world. And so the thing is, the reason I bring that up is because we're so accustomed to doing this every single year once we hit a certain age that when it was time for me to die, I was the one who decided where and when, and not how I died really, but there was a ceremony, and it was considered a cause for celebration. You chose the time you were dying. You didn't kill yourself. There was a little ceremony where the women that were doing herbal concoctions and stuff gave me something and put poultices on me or something, and then the elders gave me a blessing. And then I got up, walked out of this hut, found a place in the jungle, dug a pretty shallow thing that was about the size of my body, and my head was up a little bit, covered myself with leaves, and then sank down into the ground. My soul sank down into the earth, and I could feel this whole thing. And then took almost like a U-turn and went straight up into the sky. And it was that's when my mouth was smiling. Like the whole thing was just like, oh. And then there were two things about that. So then that very easily took me into the healing part of the whole session because I was so relaxed and so involved in this part of it. And it felt so good that, that just made it very easy for me to go into the higher self part. Well, the other thing was, for some reason, all my life, this is going to sound so weird, and I always thought it was so weird, but I still felt it. I've always been drawn to wanting to lie down on the ground. And I especially like the idea of lying on freshly tilled soil because I did a lot of gardening and all I wanted to do, but I live on a main street. People walk by and think I'm dead in my garden. I always wanted to just lie down in that freshly tilled earth and just kind of sink into it to relax. And sometimes I used to use that thought to relax myself. And that I went, wow, she didn't know that. I didn't think about it until it happened, you know? So,
Wow.
pretty amazing.
Yes, it's just those little synchronicities that, like you said, you weren't actively thinking about it, but you can tie it back to experiences that you had, which is
Yeah.
It's so cool. It's probably one of my favorite things about spirituality is just looking at the threads that bring you to where you are. One other question for you about sessions in general. Aside from the past life regression, you had mentioned before you were a QHHT practitioner, you had been into energy healing, kind of spiritual realm of things. Would you say that plays a factor in how easily someone is able to open up during the QHHT session or experience some of these profound things that some of your clients had happen to them? Or do you think that that mind body connection, spiritual connection, is not totally necessary?
Helps. I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I think, it depends on how able the person is to relax and kind of let go of the surroundings. And obviously, I have a part in that in trying to make that set the circumstances so that that can happen. But I have found that people who have, I've usually asked people, have you ever done a guided meditation? Have you ever meditated? Do you know what that feels like? But I've had people, actually recently, I had a situation where the woman said, well, and I know she's been into spiritual stuff for a while, but she said, I've tried to meditate, but I'm not really that good at it. I don't do it that often, and I don't really do it that easily. She had an amazing session. She had several in the same session of those kind of ecstatic experiences. So it's usually the people that have some difficulty, again, like I said, usually need a good amount of control. And I think that being able to do something like the group sessions helps take some of that away, that not knowing what it's going to be like. Like I said, no matter how much I've been enthusiastic about doing something, if it's the first time, I'm always going to go, kind of got my eyes open going, oh, what's happening next? More of a curiosity.
That makes a lot of sense. So, looking ahead, what excites you most about the future of QHHT and spiritual healing? And how do you see people using this to rise to their fullest potential?
Well, one of the things that excites me about it is that I feel like every time someone experiences some sort of healing, that it has ripple effects throughout the universe, basically. But especially here on Earth, I think it lets things go that are limiting and it opens you up to spirit more. And it lets the best part of yourself come through more fully. And one of the other things I like about now, doing it now is that so many more people know about these kinds of things. When I first started looking at this stuff, it was really fringe, really fringe.
It was woo woo, as they call it.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I'm always I'm like, okay, what woo woo thing are you up to now, Joanna? And that's okay. I'm owning that. I think more and more people are open to it. There's so much. I think the internet has played, for better or not better or worse. The internet has its ups and downs, is what I'm saying. But it has played a significant role in people just having access to this kind of information and hearing other people talk about it and having their own experiences. Even through there's so many things like guided meditation on YouTube, you know? So that alone gets like the podcast that I was talking about that I watch sometimes I just checked it last night because I knew I was going to be talking to you today, has 948,000 subscribers.
Wow.
And so that doesn't mean, so subscribers don't equal viewers. You get many more viewers. So you've got probably millions of people that are listening about things like near death experiences, channeling, all that kind of stuff. So I think we're in an environment and a time that's ripe for all of this. People to heal themselves, live better lives. The more you do that, even if it doesn't, and I know it energetically has ripple effects throughout the cosmos, but if you're happier and healthier, so are the people around you, so are the people you run into on the street, all of that. So I think that's really, and the whole idea of fullest potential that's always been a thing with me. Like, how can I meet my fullest potential, but also how can being able to help other people go that deeply? It's just astonishing to me, and it's really satisfying. And again, I'm kind of honored to do it. Not kind of, I am honored to do it and to watch these things happen, to watch the person while they're in this state and what is happening and how it happens and everything is pretty profound for me.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for all of the work that you're doing to help people connect with their inner selves and their inner wisdom. For listeners that would like to book a session with you or learn more about QHHT, what's the best place for them to connect with you?
So I have a website pretty much ready for prime time. I'm having to tweak it all the time. But it's joannaroux.com, so JoannaRoux.com. And also the QHHT official.com website. If you just type in a search, in the browser, QHHT, it'll come up immediately. That's a really good place for learning more about what the people who developed it and have charge of it have to say about it. And there's also on the QHHT official site, there's a find a practitioner listing of all the QHHT practitioners, and there are thousands. I mean, there are people from all over the world. So you can find somebody in your area. I'm in Rhode Island, so that's the southern New England area.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks so much for having me.